Lee's going to demonstrate something that we all devs know and are, a little bit guilty of, which is we love to make reusable things. We love it when we can make a thing and it was really complex or it was not, but we love to reuse that thing over and over again, especially when people from other departments like say legal or HR or finance call us and say, hey, that thing you made last time was really cool. Can you make us another one that's like slightly different? And then, like Seth was saying before, we go off and we're like, oh my God, why? Fine, I'll do this again. And when that thing is a durable function, reusable components, we can go off and reuse it across a variety of Power Apps or Power Automate or ASP.NET or .NET WPF apps, whatever it is, you can reuse these durable functions. So right now, Lee's going to show us one of his best life hacks for how to look incredibly smart to his HR, legal, finance, operations department. Thank you so much for being a willing victim, Lee. Welcome to Powerful Devs.
Hey, thanks, Donna, and thanks, Seth. You guys have done a fantastic job so far hosting this, and the sessions so far have just been great. You're quite right. I was voluntold straight into this after meeting Donna at Ignite, and as you quite rightly point out, watering Keith on the stage at Ignite there. So we figured we'd do something maybe a little bit more serious this time, but maybe not by too much. So we did want to cover some of the topics of reusing functionality and how do we do that in respect to the Power Platform. So how do we do that with Azure functions, but not just little bits and pieces, but some fairly hefty other areas and other things that we'd like to reuse and like to have available to us in all different apps that we build in all different circumstances and in all different areas. So first of all, I think Donna's done a little bit of an introduction, but just a little bit about me. My name's Lee Baker. As you can see, I'm a business applications technical lead in the finance sector in London in the UK. I spend bits and pieces of my spare time just working through IoT and Azure stuff, as Donna's mentioned, but also spend some time trying to help people, mentor people, and bring some of the Fusion developers that we're talking about. So whether that's coders or citizen developers, and bring them on the journey, bring them through to see where they can help their businesses grow and help themselves grow in their own careers. So if you want to reach out to me, please do. You can see my details on screen, my Twitter, LinkedIn, and my email address. Reach out about anything I talk about today. See if we want to chat it over. If you've got some challenges, got some ideas, got some things you want to try out, come and see me, and we'll chat it through and we'll make it work. So that's probably enough about me, other than to say that I will be, as all the other speakers are, on Dev2 after we've spoken here. And from there, let's dig in and look at a bit more detail about what we're kind of going to cover here. So first of all, we're going to look at why to reuse this functionality. As Donna says, it's something that we just do as devs, but do we really think about why we do that? It's not just to hack it quickly sometimes and just be able to hack stuff out quicker the next time. There's reasons for it. There's backups and there's reasons why we do what we do. How do we handle not just little bits of functionality, but what about these big processes? What if they're quote engines? What if they're, I don't know, we've got to spin through millions of records, call loads of different APIs. How do we handle all that sort of thing in a sensible way? And then furthermore, how do we actually bring that to the Power Platform? How do we tie these two things together, these Azure functions, these reusable bits of code? How do we bring that to life in the Power Platform? How do we help everyone in our organization achieve more with that? Firstly, we're going to look at how we do that with the back end of the Power Platform, so the common data service, and then how do we empower the apps themselves to use these functions, and how do we move that on so that our UX, our user experience, is just much, much better than it has been, and how do we get that out the door in the best, most efficient way? So to dig into those bits just a little bit further, why do we reuse the functionality? Yes, shorter development time. It's one of the things we think about. If we've spun up some code for building an app, then the shorter development time is great because when we spin up app number 2, we haven't got to build that bit of functionality again. If we think about, I don't know, just a small piece of validation that we could put in an Azure function, let's say validating a UK phone number. So we give it the country code of, say, the +44 at the start, and then if it's a mobile number, we'll have 07 at the start and we'll drop the 0. That kind of leads on to the next point of the consistency. Even within that tiny, tiny little scenario, there's loads of little nuances of things that could go wrong, things that could be different here, there, or the other. We don't want our web app over here, our internal Canvas app over there, and our portal for our customers to be different. We don't want the experience to be different in all those places. Think about the mobile app as well. Customers shouldn't go to the website and the mobile app and get a different experience on even the smallest of things like managing a phone number validation. That also helps with the clean data and keeping everything good, right? Clean get data is good data. We can then push that back through to our Power BI if we're talking about something a bit more than phone numbers, and we're in a better place for the future to be able to take that on. Easier testing. Now, this probably is taken as a given, but again, just with that small example of the phone number, there's loads of little scenarios. If we're talking about automated tests, it takes a while to write those, to give it all the different scenarios to make sure we're in a good place to push out good quality, secure code. If we're talking manual tests, that can take ages to get through all of these different scenarios. So let's think about the reuse from that point of view. Let's just, once we've got this thing set up and spun up in production once, then every time we test a new app, so I'm building app 2, I'm building mobile app 3, I'm building website number 4, every little bit there, all I need to do is check I'm connecting to my Azure function. The rest of what the function does, already covered, out the way. And I guess point number 4 on here, something we almost take for granted sometimes, specifically as devs, the live proven code, exactly what we were just talking about. If we have app 1 that's been deployed, it's been sat in production, being used within our mobile app for 6 months, a year, we then know that we don't really have to think about that little bit of functionality or that bit of functionality or that bit of functionality. It's already in production, it's already proven. We know that's going to scale up and scale down as we need. When we're pushing out app 5, we just know that the rest of the business is much more comfortable that all of these separate bits of functionality are all there. They're all out, they're all working. It's just this one core bit that's going out, which gives us a lot more buy-in from the business to be able to get more out and get it out quicker. So I think we speed everyone up this way in all possible parts of the development and app lifecycle. So that's a bit about why we reuse the functionality. Now, how do we tie that in with a Power Platform? How do we bring this no-code, low-code platform and the scale and the awesomeness of Azure together? And how do we bridge the gap? There's no cliffs between the two, but how do we actually tie them together? And the main one that we've kind of heard about with a great talk on serverless before this, one of the main parts of serverless that we see most commonly used on the platform is Azure Functions. So Azure Functions, if anyone's not aware, are just ways of bringing our fairly small, succinct pieces of code and sitting them with our different business events and our data. And just to have our triggers there and to piece those things together. Sorry, I've got to run that animation again. That's just too good, that, right? Whoever built that originally needs some credit there. But the Azure Functions, so we're mostly going to be talking about Azure Functions triggered by a HTTP request in this talk, somewhat akin to an API. But we can have all sorts of things trigger functions, whether it's service bus topics, messages, or whether we're binding to Cosmos DB, and the same with outputs as well. We have the whole authentication wrapper if we need different types of authentication here. We can sit it behind Azure API management for making things secure and splitting things apart and separating our concerns. And we can also write them in multiple languages. We're going to have a look at a C# example in a second, but we can write in JavaScript, TypeScript, all sorts of different languages that are available for us now. We also have the advantage of scalability. It's one of the main things that comes out of serverless. This thing's going to scale up to phenomenal levels and back down again as and when we need it without us doing a thing, which is great. But what if we need a little bit more than what functions out of the box in their original state can do? So they can do more than just the phone number validation that I talk about. But what if we get back to that scenario of running through and hammering through millions of records? What if we're running through having to call the APIs and things? Microsoft's got us covered there as well. We've got these things called durable functions. So durable functions are kind of a layer that are going to sit on top of Azure functions that let us do these kind of orchestration areas. So if we build ourselves an orchestration function that says, hey, I work in financial services, I work for a bank, so let's think about bank account opening. What if we want to fill in a load of fields on a form, and we want to click a button and we want to go away and do a credit check? We want to go and do address checking. We want to go and do maybe criminal records checks, if that's the sort of, depending what we're doing here. Then the orchestration part of the durable functions let us do that. We can then start to think about, okay, those checks, do we want to send off all those tasks to start with and wait for them all to come back? Or do we just want to wait for some to come back? Or do we want task 1 to have flown away and come back before we start task 2? There's loads of different patterns and way we can handle that. So one of the advantages of being in code is just the complete way we can customize that, which is similar sorts of workflows that you might be able to build in Flow or Logic apps, but we're in complete code here and we can just get to the real detail of exactly how we want each of these things to be handled. And because Azure functions are stateful, we can get to the Azure tables that are managing the state for our functions behind the scenes and query them if we need to. The advantage of durable functions is if we were waiting for a confirmation to come back, an approval to come back, that our functions are just going to close themselves down. We don't need to worry about them at all, and then we're not going to be charged for all that wait time. They'll just spin themselves back up as needed, and we'll just start the journey again. So if we have a look at just how easy the Azure durable functions are to write here, we can look at the very bottom of the page, which within our HTTP start, we can just see how easy it is to set up an Azure function here. We can see the get and the post methods. We can then see it calling our account opening function, which is our orchestrator, which is calling out and awaiting on the different tasks from the different functions here. Then when we've got all of that data back and we've made our decision, we can then go on to open the bank account in this case, or we can pass back what problems came back to be dealt with by another system. So they're really, really simple to spin up. Now, these kind of further API endpoints I kind of mocked in the closed down bits of the code there, but you can see within 70-ish lines there of Visual Studio, we've got a fully working deployable Azure function, which, to be quite honest, most of that you can get from sort of the starter exercises from Microsoft. So if functions are new to you, don't be scared to dig in and have a go. And likewise with the management and deployment of functions, if you're used to deploying serverless stuff, functions are going to be super simple. They're really easy. Azure DevOps or whether it's different build processing tools, whatever, anything's going to deploy these without a problem and with very, very little configuration. If you're new to the sort of deployment ALM, SDLC processes, Azure Functions is a great place to start because they're a really, really easy get up and go to get into this. The other thing I just want to mention real quick is application insights. So all of the functions have this, is straight out of the box, all of your telemetry, all of your login there and ready to go. If you want an alert sent out when your function fails 100 times in 5 minutes, once you hit that, we can have those sorts of things built straight in. So that's enough about the functions. Now let's bring them into the platform. How do we get and call functions from the Power Platform? So first of all, from the common data service, there's a few areas we can call them from there. Then we have Power Automate flows. They were being talked about earlier. If you've not used flows before, please, 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 at the end of this event today, just go and make something in your life easier with flows. You'll then be hooked and you'll be using them all the time. Plugins, they're part of the common data service and just allow us to trigger bits of code on change of a few places. And then the JavaScript, the real getting to the front end, making that user experience better, being able to empower things to be built quicker and deployed quicker from the actual app side of things. So let's dig into these a little bit more. Common data service and web hooks that sit within, or web callbacks, whatever you're used to seeing. So if we were to be, let's say, wanting to register something like this every time a contact was updated, I could go to my Power Platform Maker Center. I can register a webhook against the contact update event, then put in my URL, which is going to be my URL from my Azure function. Then every time a contact's updated, I haven't got to think about it. My Azure function is called with very, very little then for me to do, but to just leave that working in the background. Very, very easy to set up. Plugins. I touched on them a little bit earlier. But if we're looking to put plugins into our common data service, we can have them run at the sort of point of validation where the API is called there, or just before the SQL event of saving or whatever, or just after, or further down the chain in an asynchronous manner. We could write all the logic in plugins, but that doesn't make it very reusable, does it? Only within the platform, and we want this to be reusable everywhere. So the just one gotcha with that is let's not have a really long running Azure function that's put in a synchronous point of our save on CDS, because otherwise you're going to get issues there. You're going to have SQL timeouts and blocks and users not being able to do things. So avoid that. And just very quickly, custom workflow activities. We don't use these very much anymore. Flow has taken over a lot of the jobs where our classic workflow would have been used. But if we're extending the API, we can put DLL in there of some C# code or whatever, and we could just push that functionality straight out now to Azure Functions so that we can have that managed in that way instead. So that's the back-end systems done. Let's now have a look at the front end. How do we get into these apps? How do we start scripting in these apps to get our functionality used from Azure Functions into the different types of apps we have? First of all, we've got the CDS forms. If you're used to CRM or Dynamics in times gone by, this is going to be the forms for your records there. Or nowadays, we would call them model-driven apps and the forms for, say, your contact. We can load JavaScript in there that's going to run on start of the page, on load of the page, sorry, or field change or save, whatever. Few lines of JavaScript, completely standard web calls with your authentication out to your Azure function. And you could be calling out to a quoting engine that's used from all of your different systems. And then you've got it in your model-driven app to use for your internal colleagues. PCF controls, Power Apps Component Framework controls, one of the best things to come to the platform recently. If you've not seen them or worked with them, it's the bit of reading to do out of today afterwards. There are a web packet that you can put on both model-driven app forms that we talked about above and on Canvas apps as well. So that's wicked. That allows us to call our code from either place with one really pretty little web packet that we can put on the form. If we use that to call out to our function as well, we're almost doubling the layers of reusability here, because we can use all these things and double up where and separate the deployment of them as well, just to make everything absolutely shine and used all over the business. Portals, a third different type of Power App here. So very similar to the CDS forms we talked about, bit of JavaScript on there. We're really just standard JavaScript to call any web API, and we're going to be calling out to our functions from here. That's now covered all of the different types of apps that we have in some ways on the Power Platform. That allows us to use our function from all different front ends of the platform. And it goes a little bit further than just the front ends, doesn't it? We've talked about Power Automate flows and when we can use them. We should start thinking about when can we use Power Automate flows within the platform, and how do we call our functions from there? That's at times slightly easier said than done, and I'll explain why there's a couple of caveats on that. But so let's start with the when to start with. So we can start when a record is selected within a model-driven app. We go to a list of records. We're we're just ticking 1 or 2 or 5 of those. We're just hitting the on-demand flow button, and we're just going to push all of those records straight to flow to trigger our flows. We can then work on calling our Azure function from there. We might be utilizing things that way because we want the power of flow to do a lot of the jobs we're looking to do, and then we just need to push out some of the grunt work out to Azure functions. Or we can use from the standard CDS triggers that we've kind of talked about. So anytime a record's created, read, updated, or deleted, we can start to trigger out from there. So then a little bit on the how. So once we're in our flow, how do we get out to our Azure function? So we've got the HTTP request actions from flows or logic apps, which we can do. We can put our authentication in there. We can put our data in there, our URLs in there, and we can make this HTTP request out, and we can get a payload back again to be used in the rest of our function. That's great, but that's quite a high barrier to entry. HTTP requests are not easy for people that understand technology. If we want to make this easier for our Fusion developers, we need to start thinking about the custom connectors. We've seen a bit of an example of that earlier on, just before this session, and we're going to see bits and pieces later on about custom connectors from April Dunham and Justin New. So I'm not going to dig into the detail of the custom connector there, but what I do want to do is just think about why to go for a custom connector. HTTP requests are quite often blocked by our data loss policies within Power Platform environments. And the reason I've seen this is that if someone works out how to use HTTP requests, they can circumnavigate a lot of the other actions in Flow. So you might be able to, it might have blocked the Twitter connector, yet someone else could connect to Twitter because they understand HTTP requests. So there is some management to do around that. So for the most part, I would say, if at all possible, use custom connectors at that point. To layer on another argument for custom connectors there is that custom connectors can then be used straight from the Canvas apps. That allows us to then, from the Canvas app, not have to worry about calling out to a flow or using a PCF control. If we need to just use that Azure function, we've got that connector there ready to use. As you've seen demoed in the last session, you're straight into it without needing to call anything else, and you're straight into the serverless world, straight from your Canvas apps. So I think what we've covered there is all parts of the Power Platform. We've covered the back-end APIs and common data service layer. We've covered the front end, the apps, the Canvas apps, the model-driven apps, and the Power Apps portals. And we've now covered the glue that fits all of those things together, Power Automate flows. We know how to get to all of these different parts of the platform out to Azure functions. So we've covered what the functions are to start with, why to reuse the code in the first place, why to bring it out of the Power Platform altogether and leave it in Azure, and then how to cover it from all places. But I think one of the things we should just think about before we start building anything in any organization is just think how the organization is set up as well. So we could write our code on a JavaScript on a CDS form and have our phone number validated. We could push that out to a function that's specifically tied to one client ID and force it to only be used from one app. But the Power Platform doesn't live alone. It's living in the whole of Azure now. Let's have the rest of our organization's teams working on this and being able to use these bits of functionality. But then if we step out again, Azure doesn't live on its own. If you're working in a big enterprise, there's a fair chance that AWS is set up one side and that you've got G-Cloud set up the other side as well. Big companies are using multi-cloud. Let's still not build the same phone number validation 3 times there. Let's set up all these organizations to succeed. Let's set up one phone number validation that can be used from the entire enterprise. And that's really the main point of this, is to make sure we're putting the right functionality in the right place to be used by everyone. And we've seen how we can use that from the Power Platform. So I think that probably concludes most of the talk there. Did just want to put on screen again very quickly the bit.ly link just over to the dev2 page that I'll be sat running a Q&A on for the next half an hour or so. And again, just some contact details. If there's any bits and pieces that you'd like to chat over further, you'd like to just see some examples of in more detail than the code than we can do in the 25 minutes, then please reach out through any of the mediums there. And with that, I'll hand back to Donna and Seth.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lee. That was stellar.